I just want to, I'm really happy you guys are here today. This is a very hot topic, and it's super exciting to have AR's expertise with us. He's been teaching with Tunelark since April of this year. In addition to his jazz guitar degree, he also holds a degree in sound engineering. As we all know, the world of online lessons and performance presents unique challenges in this area, and we're delighted to have him here today to kind of give us some guidance, and also with this recorded session, hopefully help some other people along the way as people continue to grow and participate with Tunelark and online lessons and do everything else that he just was talking about. So take it away, AR.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me today, everybody. I appreciate your time and everything. Yeah, so we're gonna kind of go over some of the basics of audio, which also entails online audio. Learning just a handful of things about the core concepts that we can think about using this stuff for, whether it's teaching or even someone that's doing a podcast or streaming yourself playing a game, which is a huge thing these days, or of course more importantly streaming ourselves doing music stuff, which I think is kind of why we're all here. But anyway, I'm going to go over some of the basics of this side of things and kind of talk about some of the common things that you may see online. One of the big things is like you go on Sweetwater, you go on Amazon, and you're like, what am I looking at? Like, how do I know what's going to suit my needs? And some of that can be kind of hard to figure out. So I think the first thing that I'm going to do is kind of just talk about what I generally do in my online lessons. And I teach a handful of them a week, and what I'm able to do is have complete control over my sound. So I have a pair of microphones. You don't see them at the moment because they're sitting right next to my laptop. I use these because, admittedly, they were free to me. And the other reason is they are out of the way. And as you can see, I also always use headphones. That's the biggest thing I think for anyone to take away from this class, is that no matter whether you're using an iPad, an iPhone, or I guess smartphone, I should say, or laptop, desktop, whatever your rig is, if you've at least got a pair of headphones, wired or wireless, it'll be a definite step up from using the built-in speakers and microphone in your computer. Now, quickly, I'm going to address why that is. Some of you may have noticed that if you're using the built-in speakers and the built-in microphone on your device, when you're having a two-way conversation and sound is both coming at you from your speakers and you're talking, what'll happen is that one of those two things will mute down. Usually it's the speakers on the laptop will mute down, so you can miss things, because if the speakers and mic were both left wide open, it would just create a giant feedback loop. Of course, all of our guitar players here and any live vocalists will know feedback does not sound good. And especially when you're in such a small environment, you're not expecting it, it can be quite a shock. Not quite as ear-shattering as doing it with a several thousand watt PA system, but still not pleasant. So using headphones eliminates that issue from us. So, with me, I can hear and I can speak at the same time. That's the first big step. That's whether you're using any kind of fancier setup or not. Now, what I use is a digital mixer system, so I can actually pipe different sound sources into the meeting. So for instance, I can grab my guitar here and it's on a completely separate channel, but it still goes into the meeting. And the sound's nice and clear. It goes in right out of the headphone jack. I'm using Helix Native through Apple's MainStage with an iRig interface, but there's a lot of ways that you can do that. You can even use a real guitar rig and use a microphone on it. I just use the iRig system because that's actually my portable teaching system too. It packs really small. But yeah, so that's kind of what I do. And then I have another fader set up that I can even pipe in music. So I won't play any copyright protected music for posting of purposes here. But what I can do is the same thing with my guitar. I can pipe the music in, like we're working on a song, I pipe it in, Ultimate Guitar, whatever it is. And I have a separate fader that I can control that sound source so I can bring it down to talk over, and everything's going into the call at the same time. And as we all know, teaching online, we haven't quite figured out the technology to have two musicians play over the internet like we were in one room together. So what we can do is we can control the sound so that everything's coming from one source. And at least the teacher can have a unified sound source so that you know that you're not listening to your student at a completely different time than you kind of expect them. So once you kind of get a handle on the delay that they have, if you're in New York and your student's in California, it's going to be a bigger delay than if you're both in New York, right? So once you kind of have that vibe, like, okay, so if I'm listening to them play, I'm sort of used to this amount of delay, and you can kind of, it's very disjointing the first few times you do it, but you can kind of gather an idea as to where they are. If you're not really hearing the sound at the right time, like if you do the share sound option through Zoom or whatever software that you're using, it can delay the sound more than you're used to, and it can kind of throw things off a little bit. So that's the way that I do things. I just teach everything off of this board, and it really helps kind of clear up the sound. Now, let's get into a little bit about audio basics, like understanding a few basic things. So let me start this slideshow. Give me 1 second. And you'll have to forgive me that this is my first time really using Keynote. Probably should have done Google Slides, but so I wish it was the full screen, nice looking view here, but we're going to get the workspace. Anyway, so the first thing we need to talk about is there are two basic kinds of microphones. Now, the two basic types are referred to as condensers and dynamic microphones. This is really important to know because, I'll give you a personal anecdote here. One of my good friends that's on my podcast had bought a mic from Amazon. It was just a cheap $30, $40 microphone, came with a cable that goes from the XLR connector on the mic to the built-in sound card on the computer. And he complained that it didn't work. And for some reason, he didn't send it back. Don't ask me why. But he's like, this thing doesn't even work. And I'm like, well, no. And he brought it to the studio, and I plugged it in and said, it does work. It's just a condenser microphone, and they didn't tell you that. They gave you the wrong cable. Almost all condenser microphones are going to require something called phantom power. So if you get a microphone, try to plug it directly into your headphone jack or your mic in jack on your computer, and it doesn't work, that might be why. And ideally, all microphones require a little extra anyway. But these are the common microphones that most people will run across. There are two types of condenser microphones: your large diaphragm mics, think someone in a recording studio. There are also what are called small diaphragm microphones, and they're also sometimes called pencil microphones. That's what I'm talking to you on right now. If you do any live sound, if you've played on a stage before, this is generally what you put on overheads on drums or a violin or something like that live. And then dynamic microphones have two primary categories: what are referred to as the dynamic mic by default, and ribbon microphones. Now, ribbon microphones, I promise that unless you worked in a recording studio or some kind of audio museum or something like that, you'll probably never run across a ribbon microphone in the wild. And the reason is because they're rather fragile and they're very expensive. Most of them are very expensive. The one that I have in this picture here is usually around $1,000 for one single microphone. But they're great in the recording studio for certain jobs. I don't even have a ribbon microphone, and I run a studio. So, and then there are two basic types of dynamic microphones, which are your microphones that you're used to seeing. The one that I have pictured here is the most ubiquitous microphone of all time. It's actually the mic symbol on most softwares. That is usually what you see in the hands of performers live. They're fantastic microphones. I probably would guess that 3/4 of the podcasts in the world are done with something similar to that. And then, of course, speaking of podcasts, you also have a large diaphragm dynamic microphones, which, as I have pictured here, is another very ubiquitous podcasting microphone. Don't really see those much on stages, but you'll probably see a lot of them be used in the real world. And if you all can still see my screen, I have one of them here. And the difference, I don't usually use this microphone. It does have a different sound to it, but as you can see, it disrupts the visual presentation of the meeting. So I don't usually tend to use that one just for the sake of visuals and also being able to move around, like grab my guitar and everything like that. But to each their own. I've moved around a lot when I teach online. So those are the different types of microphones. Now, the other thing that we need to know about is that every microphone, in order to connect to your computer, requires some form of an audio interface. So microphones work, they're in what's called the analog world. And I'm sure that a lot of you that have been interested in recording and even just audio files, like people that like to listen to records and stuff, have heard the discussion analog versus digital. And it's always framed as digital is bad and analog is good. Well, not necessarily. There's more to it, but no matter what the picture is, in order to get audio into your computer, you have to have some kind of interface which functions as a converter. Basically, you can think it converts zaps or electricity into numbers, which your computer can understand. It's a translator is another way to kind of think about it. Now, The most basic type of audio interface is your built-in audio, which is what a lot of people start off with, you know, what a lot of people still use for basic online meetings, right? Again, just your speakers and your microphone, or even just plugging headphones in. Every computer device that you have, whether it's a smartphone, a tablet, a laptop, a desktop, has what's called a sound card. And that's a simple audio conversion device, a digital audio converter. So this still does count as a audio interface. Now, the advantages of using your built-in audio, of course, the biggest advantage is that it's already there. You've already paid for the device. You don't have to spend any extra money on it, right? Don't have to think about it. If you're just using your laptop, you just set it down and you're good to go. It's as easy as it gets. The disadvantage is that they definitely have the lowest audio quality that you can get for the most part. Now, this is also dependent upon the brand. I have noticed that certain brands of devices have a better audio quality than other brands, and you can, you know, and also price range plays a big part in this too. You know, your basic public school Chromebooks are not going to quite have the same built-in audio quality as, you know, something a little bit on the higher end that's sort of built towards this kind of a thing. And the big thing is that you also can't really isolate sounds, right? So I talked about having an isolated source for everything so I can control all of my audio. Now, if you're a vocal teacher, it's a lot easier to use your built-in sound card because that's the only sound source that you really have to worry about aside from occasionally playing music maybe. But if you teach an instrument, especially electronic instrument or anything like that, it becomes a little harder to separate the sound. Now, another thing that we have to talk about with built-in sound sources and meeting softwares in general is that most devices and meeting softwares, so it's a two-step equation here, treat anything other than the human voice as background noise. So, for instance, you've probably noticed that there is an original sound option in Zoom, if you're all using Zoom a lot. They've changed it to original sound for musicians these days, which I think is kind of a cool look. So if you turn that off, you'll hear all of the nice hissing and warbling and all that kind of stuff that you get from any sound device. But it does really help you pick up fainter sounds, especially those that are far outside of the human vocal range. Now, I teach guitar, which is somewhat close to where the human voice lays, so it kind of cuts through the mix better. But if you're teaching bass or flute or anything like that, that can like really just disappear into a call. And you know, if you're teaching drums and using built-in audio, you've probably noticed that it just turns into an absolute wash of sound because it just what is happening. The sound card doesn't know what to do, essentially. So both the actual built-in audio card itself and the meeting software, and again, the built-in card being dependent on who made it, they can treat anything other than the human voice as background sound and try to filter it out. So it's a two-step thing. Now, the easiest upgrade for everybody here, and I see some folks doing this already, is just using headphones. Any old headphones will do. Now, right now I'm at my home studio and I have my full setup here. Even my full fancy recording rig and everything is all hooked up to this computer at the moment. But when I have a very busy day and I need to teach an online lesson and I'm sort of on the move, sometimes I teach from another location that's closer to my in-person students. You know, if I've got, you know, an in-person lesson and an online and then an in-person and I got to move around a lot, I'll just teach on AirPods. I'm talking to you through a Mac right now. So I use my AirPods and the sound quality is pretty good. I don't even usually turn on original sound all that often. I basically just aim my speaker that I use for my guitar for in-person lessons right at my face so I can hear it. My students hear it pretty well. And I can use the Zoom controls for sharing audio and sharing video into the call. And do a pretty good lesson that way. Is it as good as I would prefer it to be? Definitely not. But you know, for having a busy schedule and not having everything figured out, it works really well. Now, there are a couple things that we need to know about the disadvantages of using headphones. First of those is that, as you can see here, with most Bluetooth devices, there is a large amount of lag, which is definitely worse on older devices. They have been constantly improving Bluetooth as the years have gone on. So if you're using a Bluetooth set of headphones from like 2010, it's going to be a significantly larger amount of lag than what you might get from something that was made in this decade. And the other thing that you have to note when you're using headphones, wired is always best. We have an expression in the pro audio industry. Whenever we're asked, what is the best wireless microphone? We always answer with a wired one. There are a large number of reasons for that. Wireless, there's Interference that you can have is a huge issue. And I can tell you, playing a lot of shows, we use wireless in-ear monitors, and every now and again, when we're playing in a congested city center, one of the channels of headphones gets, that good old-fashioned radio snow. That'll come through the headphones because there's interference somewhere. And interference can occur with Bluetooth, any audio connection, any wireless connection, Bluetooth. Interference definitely occurred. Now, another thing worth noting is that if you're using wired headphones, some computers, especially, think your super cheap things that are given away for free by most school districts, the microphone input is on the same physical connector as your headphone. So it's like a 3-ring headphone connector, essentially, instead of a 2-ring one. If that's the case, I have noticed on some of the cheaper Chromebooks and stuff that your microphone connection can actually be disabled by using a regular set of headphones that, like I'm using today. These are Sennheiser Studio headphones. They do not have a microphone on them. So if I use these with some of those cheaper devices, it would actually disable the microphone and it wouldn't switch back to the built-in one inside the computer. It would be trying to find the microphone on your headphones, which doesn't exist, and basically just turns your sound completely off. I've had that issue happen in the past. So that is one thing that you definitely want to test that before you dive, I just got a new set of headphones, dive right into a meeting and have no sound. That would be a bad look. So you definitely want to test that before we get rolling here. Now, the next step in the path of upgrading your audio here is a USB microphone. Now, I'm sure a lot of people have seen these, have used them even. These are the most basic things for your podcasters. I mean, you can find these at any of your big box stores. I mean, I see them at every one that I go to that sells electronics. There's some kind of like Blue Yeti or other brand like that. They're very ubiquitous. They're very cheap. They're super easy to use. So one of the biggest advantages with the what we've talked about so far is that your microphone input is auto balanced. What that means is that your system or the device itself is automatically controlling what's called the gain or the loudness of your signal. So it automatically adjusts your volume so that you don't even have to think about it. Now that's super simple for anyone that is a rather novice with audio devices because you don't want to think about it, right? You just plug it in and it goes. Now, the biggest disadvantage that you have with USB microphones, sort of all-in-one microphones like this, is it's very difficult to get the microphone into a position that is good for hearing you, for plugging your headphones in, and plugging the device into the microphone. It can be really difficult to put it in a prime spot, and especially also a spot that doesn't obstruct visually. Depending on what you're teaching and how you teach, it doesn't really matter as much about the visual obstruction. Again, I move around a lot, so it's hard for me to kind of have this mic on the stand and be in my face all the time. So the other thing is, of course, with USB microphones, is you're pretty much committed to that one sound source. So if you're not a big fan of the microphone, then you're kind of stuck with it. You just got to get rid of the whole thing. But they're very inexpensive. You can get these things for not a huge amount of money. And of course, if you go adventuring around on Amazon, you can definitely find some knockoff ones that are not expensive at all. Some of these are even bus powered, which means that they do not require any external power connector. They just take power right out of your computer, just like a flash drive would. You don't have to plug in another wall wart. So that's a huge advantage because, wall warts are trying to find power in certain setups is always hard. You got your laptop plugged in already. And it's like, well, that's the one thing in the outlet and that's all I got space for. So major advantages for ease of use, disadvantages being configurability, and they also definitely do not have the greatest sound quality in the world. Now, if you're not recording all the time, it doesn't really, not the biggest deal in the world, right? But, if you're trying to kind of build yourself a online teaching / I want to record myself occasionally kind of setup, USB mic definitely doesn't have a huge upgrade in sound over some built-in audio devices. Some are better than others, and of course, price tag will tell you the evidence there. Now, the next step in the chain here is what's called an audio interface as a separate device. Now, what we've talked about so far is all of these have an audio interface integrated, right? So it's kind of a good way to think about it would be, I'm sure a lot of you had to deal with setting up your internet, or at least troubleshooting your internet. So you can kind of think of your built-in audio and your USB mic as an all-in-one box you get from Comcast or Verizon. You just plug it into the coaxial or the optical line, and then it makes the Wi-Fi and everything's good to go. Now, when you get to the point of using a separated audio interface, you can think of it as having a separate modem and a router, right? So a lot of better setup, if you don't want to rent from them, usually you go that route. So what I have pictured here, this is actually my setup that I record with. So the advantages of having an audio interface rig is that it is by far the most flexible for the most amount of things that you want to do. So my interface rack that I have pictured here, I can record up to 40 inputs at one time. So that's an entire band with 2 mics on every drum in the drum kit. Actually, the last time I recorded my band, it was only 37, I think. So that's a lot of microphones. That's more microphones than most people own. Well, most audio professionals own, let alone normal people. Now, the huge disadvantage of this is, as you can see by looking at it, it is rather intimidating, and you can probably see through the slots there that there are a disturbingly large amount of wires that are required to make this thing work. I just recently completed a move, and just the wires to get my interface rack connected to my computer and everything connected within each other filled up about 2 Amazon boxes, like standard size Amazon boxes. It was a lot of connections. They're definitely also the most expensive. They can be, because if you get an audio interface, then you also have to buy a separate microphone. Now, the major advantage of this is that you can have that where the interface is on your desk, you plug your headphones into that, you've got control of it here, and you can position your microphone anywhere else as long as you have a long enough cable to do so. You're not tethered to one thing. It's a more flexible setup. You can move everything around. Now, the other thing about having a separate audio interface than having a built-in mic or USB mic, it does not automatically change your volume for you. So you have to be aware of that. Now, Zoom will kind of smooth things out for you. If you do not turn on original sound, it'll sort of automatically adjust the gain to a certain amount, and it will kind of make your job a little bit easier. Now, major disadvantage with this that I did not put in the thing here is that Zoom and most other audio softwares will only allow you to use the 2 inputs of your audio interface, right? So for me, I can choose any 2 inputs of my 40 inputs, but only 2. So if I have my microphone, my guitar, and my music, that's at least 3 inputs if we're talking just mono here. So it will only let me pick 2 of those. So that brings us to the last slide here of new things, is a USB mixer. Now, there are a lot of options in this category. Some of these, the mixers that you tend to see that have USB connections, live sound mixers especially, can get really expensive. But there's no reason to use something like an X32 or anything like that, an M7. Like, you don't need a full production quality mixer. There are mixers that are specifically designed for exactly what we're doing. They're usually marketed under the term of podcast mixers. Not the company that we're using, but the other Zoom makes one. There's, the one that I have pictured here is the one that I'm talking to you through now, which is a Behringer Flow 8. I think Mackie makes them. There are also analog mixers, which are pretty inexpensive, that have USB connections on them. Now, the major advantage of this, as we've demonstrated with my setup that I have here, I can pipe a whole bunch of different sound sources all in. I can do up to 8 individual sources here. I can pipe all of that in, and then that goes to the Zoom call as just left and right, just one signal. So I can mix all of that down. That's why it's called a mixer, because it mixes all of your signals together and presents it as one complex signal. So I have complete control over the level of everything that I have. I can, if I want to be a little quieter, I can reduce my volume on my microphones. Whatever I need to do, I can blend the music in, I can blend the guitar in, and I have completely isolated control. I can have the level adjusted as we go. Each thing has its own source. And the best part is I can monitor everything that I am sending and receiving through my headphones with this particular mixer. Most mixers should allow you to do that. Whenever you're presenting something like this, whenever you're trying to do a more complex setup, you definitely want to be able to listen to what you're doing. So for instance, when I'm sending a song into the stream, I don't have speakers or anything set up to hear it through, so I want to hear that go through my headphones. And that's it's an important thing. When I'm teaching a new song or something like that, you got to be able to hear that. Same with my guitar. I only have the direct output source for my guitar. Like, of course I can hear my strings, but my guitar tone and all that stuff is just going into the mixer. I don't have any other way to hear the full electrified guitar tone, if you will. So using a mixer like this, I think, is the best option for getting the most versatility in your online teaching setup, but it is definitely the most difficult to get set up with, because you have to kind of understand how signal flow works, and you got to get into the app or control of the board and use everything. If you're using an analog one, it's a lot easier because everything's laid out there. There is a physical knob or fader for every single function on the console, whereas with an all digital one like what I've got here, some of the functions are rather difficult to access without using the app that Behringer has provided with it. So there's degree of things that we can do here and kind of mix all this together. Now, the last thing I had to present here is another way to think about the different styles of audio devices to use for teaching is like thinking about your shampoos. So your built-in audio, of course, it's like your 5-in-1. You use it for dish soap and butter for your eggs in the morning if you want to, because it's just the easiest. Just grab it, go. It's good for everything. Going to the headphones is a bit like a 3-in-1, right? So can't use it for dish soap, but it does almost everything. It's just a little bit more complicated to use. Whereas you go into the USB mic, it's kind of like a shampoo and conditioner. You still need separate body wash, headphones and everything like that. And then of course, when you get into the interface and USB mixer route, that's like getting your full salon care kit. You got your regular shampoo, you got your secondary shampoo and the leave-in conditioner, and terms that I only know about because I've heard them on TV and stuff like that. So you can kind of think of it like that, right? So the farther you go down the list, the more difficult it is to kind of use all of it together, if that makes some sense. So yeah, there you go. That is the basics of doing online audio. Yeah.
I would definitely, thank you so much. And I would definitely like to open it up. There's just a few of us, so I'd like to open it up for questions from you guys. Feel free to just unmute yourself and have at it.
I think there's a chat. Oh, sorry, that was just you. Okay, didn't realize that was you.
Yeah, you mentioned something about, well, specifically, I use acoustic instruments when I'm teaching.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm in the process. I've got an interface. I'm trying to integrate more, but currently I've just been using my headphones here, which has the built-in mic. But I did notice, like you said, with bass, there's a harder time kind of picking up that lower range of sounds. I guess my question is, when you're working with an acoustic instrument, versus like an electric guitar plugin, is there a certain setup that you've seen as far as like pickups, microphone, kind of what works best for picking up acoustic instruments?
Yeah, so that's actually a fantastic question, and something I didn't address directly in my presentation because I don't generally use an acoustic. For me, I prefer electric guitars, mostly because I work on rock stuff, but also electrics are thinner, so I can move around with them a little easier. But I have taught with acoustic instruments before. Now, using one microphone, like a decent quality condenser microphone, they're generally better at picking up everything. Dynamic microphones are a bit more focused in sound. So if I'm using a condenser microphone like the setup that I have today, actually, so another thing that wasn't necessarily audio related, but I have an app that I use called, well, and now I'm disconnected. Sorry, give me one quick second. Let me connect this again. So I have this app that I use called Camo Studio that works on PC, Mac, Android, iPhone, that allows your phone to become a webcam. So basically, I just have my phone on a mic stand with a little phone clamp I got on Amazon, but this is the setup that I have. So these two little microphones like that. So if I'm teaching acoustically, I'm just using these two microphones, and that generally picks up the sound pretty well. Now, if you were more interested in doing a standard, so I do have to also preface that recently Apple has added a way for your phone to directly be used as a webcam, and now I have to switch through that as an option that wasn't used to be an option. But so generally what I would do with an acoustic instrument is oftentimes just using these microphones is good enough. But if you've got one microphone, like if you're using like the SM7B, for instance, which is very directional, it's very in your face. If I just move a little off of it, it just, I completely disappear. So if you're using something like this to control the sound, then a secondary microphone is definitely a great option, especially if you have a 2-channel interface, which is the most common type to get. The Focusrite 2i2, that's a hugely popular one.
you can definitely use a secondary microphone. That'll get the whole room. And of course, as you probably know as an acoustic performer, the sound quality from using a microphone over using the direct is definitely a little bit higher. You definitely get that subtlety from the finger noise and all that stuff, which some people don't want. But if you're, definitely trying to get a more acoustically contained sound, if you've got a lot of background noise, like dryers running, cats digging around in their litter box, like I've got down here, having that direct line is definitely not a bad look. It's definitely a great thing to have as an option. So the answer is whatever you can afford and whatever is easiest for you. Now, of course, a lot of acoustic instruments don't have direct inputs, so that's not an option for everybody. But definitely having a small stand, have a separate mic for your acoustic guitar, not a bad idea if you've got the budget for it.
I also think that maybe Asher was also talking about, is there a pickup that he could attach to his guitar?
Oh, yes. Thank you. Yeah. So there are acoustic guitar pickups that you can add. Fishman makes a lot of them. And much like microphones, you can go from everything from like $30 all the way up through like several hundred. So Fishman makes a multitude of systems. There are, the cheaper ones. There's LR Bags makes one that just lays in. It's magnetic, and that can just plug directly in. The $30 one, I found this. I don't even remember what brand it was, but it was a local shop that I used to take lessons at, and it's just a little stick-on piezo pickup that you stick onto anything. It's got that kind of, it's almost like poster putty that's on it, and that definitely works. They're super cheap, but as the same thing with microphones or with any acoustic, any musical, anything, the less you spend on it, the less quality that you're going to get out of it. So that little stick-on pickup definitely was not something I would purchase now. But a nice like LR Bags or Dean Markley. There you go. Dean Markley makes the little magnetic ones. They're great. They definitely get the job done for a budget, and they've got built-in cords. Of course, that's the issue. If you don't have the built-in pickup, then you've got that cord dangling out of it. Got to figure out something to do with that. So. Yes, they do make pickups that do not require permanent modification for your guitar.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sabine, Gray, do you guys have any questions you'd like to ask?
If you're having well, I don't really have a fancy microphone yet. I just been using like listening to the student through the headphones.
Mm-hmm.
And then I found my headphone mic wasn't like the greatest, so I was using the microphone on the MacBook Pro. But I don't know. Yeah, I want to dial in my system where I don't get all kinds of background noise. So, but I've had a Blue Yeti in the past, but you were talking about how that could be a little complicated. So I'm just trying to figure out like what mic I could get.
Yeah, the Yeti's actually pretty easy to use. They're pretty much plug and play. The only knob that you have on it is your headphone control, I think. Well, there's different ones in their series. The Snowball, the Yeti. So I don't really keep up with those. Some of them have a little bit more complicated controls, but generally they're as easy as plug and play, especially if you're using Apple products, because Apple has what's called a universal driver system. So with Windows, you have to deal with ASIO drivers, and every single device has a slightly different driver. So you've got to have all these programs installed. With Mac, I've installed, like, of all the audio interfaces that I've owned, which I think we're up in like double digits, over my career as a recording engineer, I've only had to install drivers for my current studio ones because they're kind of complicated and there's controls and stuff in them. So as far as complexity, if you've still got that Blue, like it's as easy as plug and play. So they're really, really, really easy to use. Another thing that I would suggest is if you're, at a certain budget, without me like recommending brands that I'm not in any way affiliated with or anything like that. If anyone has got like a Sweetwater guy or Guitar Center engineer or something like that, talking with your sales rep at one of those companies and like, hey, this is my budget. I'm trying to just slightly upgrade what I've got here. You have any suggestions? That's always a great place to start. Because those people, other than being paid to sell you stuff, they do generally know a little bit about what's going on. And if they don't, like I know Sweetwater, for instance, I've definitely spent way too much money at Sweetwater.
You have to use headphones with the Blue Yeti?
You do, yes, generally. Now with Zoom, you do have the option to, I don't know if I can screen share this. So in Zoom, let me just do this. Oh, is it off now? I'm sorry. There we go. So in Zoom, you do have the option. I don't think I can actually screen share this window, so I'm just going to film it. You do have the option of separating your output and input devices. So with the Yeti, you could use the built-in speakers and the Yeti microphone. Now, the major disadvantage with that, of course, excuse me, one second. Sorry about the sloppy camera work there. The major disadvantage with using the built-in speakers with the Yeti is you do have the issue of feedback. So if you're just using the built-in audio, it can sort of auto-negotiate. So the speakers will mute down when you're talking, so it won't create that feedback. But I've never tried it myself, but I'm not sure whether using the built-in speakers with the Yeti will auto-negotiate like that. I'm not sure whether it will mute down the speakers, so that can definitely be an issue. But as they say, there's only one way to find out. So if you've got that ready to go, and you can use it with the built-in speakers, separating devices like that, then yeah, give it a try.
I wasn't I wasn't teaching online when I had it, and I don't have it anymore. But when I do get another mic, because I'm also going to be an ESL teacher,
Gotcha.
I need to find something that's going to be good. So if you think that so really like an audio interface possibly could help that go better.
Yeah, I generally recommend interfaces at any possible stage because, like I've mentioned, they do have the higher degree of flexibility. They are harder to set up because they don't automatically change your gain for you, so you do have to use the input gain, and clipping can happen occasionally, which is it's distortion both in analog and in digital. Of course, getting that distortion is never a pleasant sound unless you're specifically making memes that are distorted, which is a category these days, of course. But with the ability, having that interface is like a separate thing. It's a little bit less mobile than just the the USB mic. A few more pieces involved, but like I had mentioned, is you can have the interface on your desk where it's plugged into your computer, especially if you're using a desktop machine as opposed to a laptop. Having that kind of in a nice tucked away place can really clean up your desk. And then you can put that microphone on a stand, so like this one, you can swing it. Now this is a fancy studio boom stand that I've got here for my 7B, but even just like a basic, whatever cheap musician's gear stand that you can find at any local shop, you can still put the mic on that stand so that you can put it where you need it to be. And I've definitely seen, it's not something I generally just teach sitting in front of my computer, but I've definitely seen more along the presentation side of things. Think YouTube videos, people back far away so you can actually see their whole body. Having that separated microphone would be a little bit easier to kind of deal with that, and you can run your cables and keep everything nice and neat and stuff like that. So generally the separated interface with a decent microphone is going to be a little bit better audio quality than using a USB microphone. And it's something as simple as think about like the economics of it. So if you're paying $100 for a USB mic or $100 for an interface and $100 for a microphone, you can probably imagine that, okay, so the USB mic, the mic is like $50 and the interface is $50. So you can kind of gauge it's not, of course, the world doesn't work perfectly like that, but I think that might get the point across to a degree, if that makes any sense.
It does. Any last questions? Well, thank you so much for taking the time to put the slides together and to help us understand the concepts of what we're dealing with. It was incredibly helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
To me, and I'm excited about getting a microphone set up myself. So
yeah, absolutely. And I'd definitely be more than happy to make any suggestions to anyone. And if anyone has questions and you don't know how to reach out to me, if you haven't signed up, I'm not sponsored by them in any way, but I have definitely spent more than my fair share of money there. But if you do not use Sweetwater, then I highly recommend checking them out because
I love that company.
Oh yeah, their sales engineers are fantastic. When I was a kid, especially getting really started with music and audio and all that kind of stuff, I'm sure I definitely bothered more than my fair share. I would ask them all kinds of questions all the time. Now, when I was in college and shortly thereafter, I actually had former classmates that were my sales engineers, so my experience was even better. But anytime you can just reach out to them and be like, hey, I'm thinking about whatever. Actually, I'll give you a personal example. I needed stands for my reference monitors for the studio because my old setup had a nice long desk and monitor stands that were built into the desk. Now that I'm in a different space, I had to have freestanding stands. And I emailed my Sweetwater guy. I'm like, hey, I have rather nice studio monitors, but they are small. I'm looking at these different monitor stands and like, what do we need? And he's like, for the weight of yours, honestly, you don't need anything expensive. And I'm like, he knows the quality of audio monitors that I'm using and everything like that. And he's like, yeah, you don't need the expensive stuff. And, he would actually make more money. I think they do a commission system there. So he would have made more money if he'd sold me the $300 set of stands. But no, he sold me the $90 one. So
and also remember that all of you have my email address because I sent the thing out to you. So if you have questions that you really want to get to AR, just send them to me and I'll make sure to field them and we can follow through with that. And also because you're here, if you have other questions or you want to either dig more deeply or you want to go more surface with this topic, just let me know and we'll make it happen.
Yeah. And anyone, if you get my email from Tunelark, just shoot me an email. But like, hey, just, if you have any thoughts about this, I've done all kinds of weird audio engineering stuff that, I do live sound. I run a small recording studio. I do a podcast. I teach online. I record myself. I record other people. So if it requires a microphone, I've probably done something along the lines. I even do live sound for parades sometimes. So if you guys need anything, I've had some experience with some stuff and,
So we know who to go to for our next parade.
Absolutely. As long as it's within like 2 or 3 hours of Loudoun County, Virginia, I should be all right.
Well, thank you guys for coming. And thank you again, AR, so much for your time today. Really,
absolutely.
Really appreciate it.
I'm happy to help.
Okay. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.